At the far end of the counter, near the window streaked with condensation, sat Amos Reed. His hands, gnarled as old oak, rested on a chipped mug, the coffee inside long gone cold. He wore a faded flannel jacket, its elbows worn thin, and a baseball cap with a barely legible USMC stitched across the front. The cap was tilted slightly, shading eyes that held a quiet intensity, like a man who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. A small silver pin, shaped like a rifle, glinted on his lapel, unnoticed by the morning crowd. Amos was 83, though he carried himself with a stubborn straightness, as if refusing to let the years bend him. The diner was busier than usual, buzzing with anticipation for the town's annual Veterans Day breakfast, a tradition Rosie's had hosted for decades. Tables were pushed together, draped with red, white, and blue tablecloths, and a small podium stood near the door, ready for the mayor's usual speech about sacrifice and service. Amos hadn't come for the event. He'd come for his usual black coffee and a single pancake, no syrup, because Rosie's was where he started his days, a ritual as steady as the sunrise. But today, something was off. A young woman in a pressed blazer stood at the door, clutching a clipboard. She was new, probably from the mayor's office, and her voice carried a sharp edge as she checked names against her list. "Sorry, sir," she said, her tone clipped as she addressed Amos. "This event's for registered veterans only. We're at capacity. You'll need to come back later." Amos looked up, his eyes meeting hers for a moment. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just nodded, slow and deliberate, and reached for his wallet. His fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper tucked inside, a letter, its edges yellowed and soft from years of handling. He didn't pull it out. "All right," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the diner's din. "I'll settle up and go." The woman barely glanced at him, already turning to the next person in line, a man in a crisp VFW jacket who flashed a laminated ID. The contrast was stark. The man was loud, jovial, shaking hands with others as he entered, while Amos slid a few crumpled bills onto the counter and stood, his movements careful but steady. No one noticed the way his hand lingered on the letter or the faint tremor in his fingers as he adjusted his cap. Outside, the air hit him like a slap, colder now as the sun struggled to break through the clouds. The street was alive with preparations for the day, flags snapping in the breeze, a high school band tuning up in the distance, their brass notes sharp and uneven. Amos paused, his breath catching as he looked toward the town square where a small monument stood, a stone etched with names, a tribute to Millville's fallen. His name wasn't there, but he knew too many that were. He'd been 19 when he shipped out to Korea, a skinny kid from a farm just outside town. The Chosin Reservoir, 1950. The cold had been worse than anything he'd imagined, a bone-deep ache that never left. He'd carried a bar, its weight a constant on his shoulder, and he'd carried his squad's trust too, leading them through nights when the enemy was just a shadow in the snow. He didn't talk about it, not anymore. The medals were in a box in his attic, the memories locked tighter still, but the letter in his wallet, written by a buddy who didn't make it home, was a weight he couldn't set down. Amos started walking, his boots scuffing against the sidewalk. He didn't head home, though. Something pulled him toward the square, toward the monument. Maybe it was the sound of the band or the way the flags moved, like they were calling him back to a time when he'd been more than just an old man in a diner. The square was crowded by the time he arrived, a sea of faces bundled in coats and scarves. Kids ran between legs, clutching tiny flags, while their parents chatted about the parade or the weather. A stage had been set up near the monument, draped with bunting, and a group of local veterans stood nearby. Their uniforms a mix of eras: Vietnam, Gulf War, Afghanistan. Amos stayed at the edge, his hands in his pockets, the letter pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. He didn't expect to stay long. He never did. These events weren't for him, not anymore. They were for the ones who liked to talk, who wore their service like a badge. Amos had never been that way. His service was private, a quiet thing he carried alone. But as he turned to leave, a voice cut through the crowd. "Excuse me, sir." It was a young man, maybe 25, in a crisp army uniform his boots polished to a mirror shine. He stood a few feet away, his posture rigid, like he was about to salute. "Are you a veteran?" Amos hesitated. The question wasn't new, but it always caught him off guard. He nodded just once, his eyes on the ground. "Yeah, long time ago." The young man's face softened, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, like he was studying Amos. "Mind if I ask where you served?" "Korea," Amos said, the word heavy in his mouth. He didn't elaborate, didn't mention the frostbite or the nights spent listening for footsteps in the dark. He didn't need to. The young man, Lieutenant Carter, his name tape read, seemed to understand. "Chosen?" Carter asked, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. Amos's eyes flicked up, meeting Carter's. For a moment, neither spoke. The question wasn't casual, it carried weight, a recognition of what that name meant. Amos nodded again. "Yeah, chosen." Carter's posture shifted, a subtle straightening, like he was standing at attention. "Sir, you should be up there," he said, nodding toward the stage where the other veterans stood. "They're honoring Korea this year." Amos shook his head, a small, almost invisible motion. "I'm not one for speeches," he said. "Just came to pay my respects." But Carter didn't move. He stood there, his eyes locked on Amos, and something in his expression made Amos pause. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that made Amos feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. "Sir," Carter said, his voice firm but kind, "I'd like you to come with me. Please." Amos wanted to refuse, to slip back into the crowd and disappear. But there was something in Carter's tone, a quiet insistence that felt like respect, not obligation. Against his better judgment, Amos followed. Carter led him through the crowd, parting it with a polite but firm "excuse us." They stopped near the stage where the mayor was already speaking, his voice booming through a microphone about "the heroes among us." Amos felt out of place, his worn jacket a stark contrast to the polished uniforms around him. He kept his head down, his cap shielding his face. Carter leaned in, his voice low. "Wait here, sir. I'll be right back." Before Amos could protest, Carter was gone, weaving through the crowd toward a group of older veterans near the podium. Amos watched, his hands tightening in his pockets. The letter in his wallet felt heavier now, its words a whisper in his mind. "Tell them we tried, Amos. Tell them we fought for each other." The mayor's speech droned on, a litany of thanks that felt more performative than personal. Amos had heard it all before, empty words that didn't reach the quiet places where memory lived. He was about to turn away when the microphone crackled and a new voice cut through. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter said, his tone clear and steady, "I'd like to ask for a moment of your attention." The crowd hushed, heads turning. Carter stood at the podium, his uniform crisp, his face serious but warm. "Today we're here to honor those who served, who gave more than we can ever repay. But sometimes, those who gave the most stand quietly among us, unnoticed." Amos froze. His heart thudded, a slow, heavy beat. He didn't look up, didn't want to see the eyes on him. But he felt them, the weight of their attention. "I just met a man," Carter continued, "who fought at the Chosin Reservoir. One of the frozen Chosin. He's not up here with a chest full of medals, and he didn't ask to be recognized. But he's here, and he deserves our respect." The crowd murmured, a ripple of surprise and curiosity. Amos's throat tightened. He wanted to leave, to slip away before this became something bigger than he could handle. But his feet wouldn't move. Carter's voice softened, but it carried. "Sir, would you join me up here?" The words hit Amos like a gust of wind, sharp and unexpected. He looked up finally and saw Carter, looking straight at him, a hand extended in invitation. The crowd parted, faces turning, some confused, some expectant. Amos's hand went to his wallet, to the letter, as if it could anchor him. But then he saw the monument behind Carter, the names etched in stone, and something in him shifted. He stepped forward. The stage was small, just a few wooden steps, but climbing them felt like crossing a chasm. The crowd watched, silent now, as Amos reached the podium. Carter stepped back, giving him space, but his presence was steady, like a guard at his side. Amos didn't speak, he didn't know what to say, but his hand moved to his wallet, almost on instinct, and he pulled out the letter. Its edges were frayed, the ink faded but legible. He held it up not to show the crowd, but to remind himself why he was there. Carter took the microphone again. "This is Amos Reed," he said. "He fought in one of the hardest battles of the Korean War. He carried his squad through hell and brought them home. And he's been carrying their memory ever since." The crowd was silent for a moment. Then a single clap broke the stillness. Another followed, then another, until the square filled with applause. Not loud or showy, but steady, like a heartbeat. Amos looked out at the faces, at the kids with their tiny flags, at the veterans nodding in recognition. His eyes stung, but he didn't blink. Carter leaned in, his voice low enough for only Amos to hear. "You don't have to say anything, sir. But if you want to, we're listening." Amos looked at the letter in his hand, at the words he'd read 1,000 times. "Tell them we fought for each other." He cleared his throat, his voice rough but steady. "I don't talk much about it," he began, his words slow, deliberate. "But I carried a letter from a friend who didn't come back. He asked me to tell people what we did. Not for glory, just so they'd know we tried." The crowd was still, every face turned toward him. Amos's voice grew quieter, but it carried. "We were cold, scared, and far from home, but we held the line. For each other. That's all I got to say." He stepped back, folding the letter carefully, his hands steady now. The applause came again, softer this time, but deeper, like it meant something more. Carter saluted, a crisp motion that Amos returned without thinking, his body remembering what his mind tried to forget. The rest of the event blurred for Amos. The mayor shook his hand, people approached with quiet words of thanks, and a kid handed him a tiny flag, her eyes wide with awe. But what stayed with him was Carter's nod as he stepped off the stage, a silent acknowledgement that said more than words could. Amos didn't stay for the parade. He walked back to Rosie's, the letter safe in his wallet, the flag tucked in his pocket. The diner was quieter now, the breakfast crowd gone. The woman with the clipboard was still there, her face flushed as she met his eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice softer now. "I didn't know." Amos nodded just once. "It's all right," he said. "Not many do." He sat at his usual spot, ordered his coffee and pancake. But this time, when the plate came, there was a small note tucked beneath it, written in careful handwriting. "Thank you, Mr. Reed, from all of us." Amos read it twice, then folded it next to the letter in his wallet. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened, and for the first time in years, he felt a little less alone. Inspired by the quiet heroism all around us, stories like Amos's remind us to notice the unseen, to honor the unspoken. Subscribe to Hoffman's Stories for more tales of compassion and connection. The days following the Veterans Day breakfast settled over Millville like a soft blanket of routine. The flags came down, the bunting was packed away, and the town square returned to its usual rhythm. Dog walkers, kids on bikes, the occasional delivery truck rumbling past. But for Amos Reed, something had shifted, subtle as the first frost on a window pane. The air still carried that autumn bite, sharp and clean, and the scent of wood smoke lingered as he walked his usual route from his small house on Cedar Lane to Rosie's diner. His flannel jacket hung a little looser now, the weight of the letter in his wallet a familiar anchor, but the tiny flag from the girl at the square was still tucked in his pocket, its edges fraying from his absent-minded touch. Rosie's was quieter in the mornings now, the post-holiday bustle replaced by the steady hum of regulars. The neon signs still flickered, the coffee still burned, but the atmosphere felt different to Amos. The waitresses, Mary with her quick laugh, Joe with her endless refills, had started calling him by name, not just Hon or Sir. The note they'd slipped under his plate that day, "Thank you, Mr. Reed," from all of us, was folded neatly beside the letter in his wallet, a new companion to an old memory. He didn't talk about it, but he noticed the change in their eyes. Less pity, more respect. Amos sat at his usual spot by the window, the condensation tracing slow paths down the glass. His coffee steamed, untouched, as he watched the street outside. A young couple pushed a stroller past, their laughter muffled by the glass. Across the square, the monument stood sentinel, its stone etched with names that seemed to glow in the morning light. Amos's gaze lingered there, his mind drifting to the letter, to the words he hadn't read aloud on that stage. Tell them we fought for each other, Amos. Tell them we didn't break. He hadn't broken, not then, not now. But carrying that promise for 70 years had worn grooves in his soul, deep and quiet. The bell above the door jingled, pulling him back. Lieutenant Carter stepped inside, his army uniform traded for jeans and a sweater, but his posture still sharp, unmistakable. He scanned the diner, his eyes landing on Amos with a small, almost shy smile. Amos nodded, a reflex, and Carter crossed the room, sliding onto the stool beside him. "Morning, Mr. Reed," Carter said, his voice warm but careful, like he was testing the ground. "Didn't expect to see you here so early?" "Always here," Amos replied, his tone gruff but not unkind. He tapped his mug. "Coffee's better than the slop we got in 50. Carter chuckled, a low, easy sound. "I bet. Mind if I join you?" Amos shrugged, which Carter took as a yes. Joe appeared with a fresh pot, pouring Carter a cup without asking. The diner hummed around them, plates clinking, voices blending into a soft murmur. Carter sipped his coffee, glancing at Amos's cap, the faded USMC stitching catching the light. "Been thinking about what you said," Carter started, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "About Chosen. About your friend." Amos's hand stilled on his cup. He didn't look at Carter, but his jaw tightened, just enough to notice. Didn't say much. "You said enough," Carter replied. "Got me wondering about the ones we don't hear, the ones who don't stand on stages." Amos didn't respond right away. He stared at the window, at the faint reflection of his own face, lined, weathered, but still holding that stubborn straightness. "Plenty of us," he said finally. "Most don't talk." Carter nodded, like he'd expected that. "I'm working on something," he said, his voice dropping, conspiratorial. "A project. For the veterans here in Millville. The quiet ones, like you." Amos's eyes flicked to him, wary but curious. "What kind of project?" Carter leaned forward, his elbows on the counter. "A place, a community center, maybe. Somewhere vets can go. Not for speeches or medals, but just to be. To talk or not talk. To remember without being asked to explain." Amos's brow furrowed. He'd heard ideas like this before. Big plans that fizzled out when budgets dried up or interest waned. Millville wasn't a rich town. The monument in the square was the most they'd managed in decades. "Sounds nice," he said, his tone neutral. "Hard to pull off?" "Maybe," Carter admitted. "But I've got some folks interested. The VFW, the mayor's office, even Rosie's pitching in. We're starting small, a room at the library for now, but I'd like your help." Amos almost laughed, a dry, rusty sound. "Me? I'm no planner. Just an old man who likes his coffee." "You're more than that," Carter said, his voice firm but not pushy. "People listened to you out there. They saw you. That matters." Amos didn't answer. He sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him. Carter didn't press, just sat there letting the silence stretch. Outside, a delivery truck rattled by, its engine coughing. Amos thought of the letter again, of the names on the monument, of the faces he hadn't seen in 70 years. He thought of Carter's salute, the way it had felt like a bridge between then and now. "I'll think on it," Amos said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Carter smiled, small but genuine. "That's all I ask." Over the next few weeks, Amos found himself drawn into Carter's orbit, almost against his will. It started small, a meeting at the library where Carter sketched out plans on a napkin, talking about folding chairs and coffee urns. Amos sat in the back, saying little, but his presence seemed to anchor the room. The other veterans, some younger, some as old as Amos, nodded when he spoke, even if it was just a grunt or a single sentence. The woman from the diner, the one with the clipboard, was there too, her name tag reading Sarah. She apologized again, her face flushed, and Amos waved it off, though he noticed her watching him now, like she was trying to make up for something. The library room wasn't much. A faded carpet, a few mismatched tables, a bulletin board with curling flyers. But Carter was relentless, dragging in donations, rallying volunteers. Rosie's sent over trays of muffins, the hardware store donated paint, and a high school kid showed up with a toolbox, claiming he could fix the leaky radiator. Amos watched it all, skeptical but intrigued. He'd seen promises like this before in the service and out of it. Most didn't last. But Carter's energy was different. Focused, not flashy, like a man who'd seen enough to know what mattered. One afternoon, as Amos helped stack chairs after a meeting, Carter handed him a small box. "Found this in the archives," he said. "Thought you might want it." Amos opened it, his fingers slow. Inside was a photograph, grainy but clear. A group of Marines, their faces young and grim, standing in the snow. Chosin, 1950. Amos recognized himself instantly. Second from the left, his bar slung over his shoulder, his eyes hollow but sharp. Next to him was Tommy, the one who'd written the letter, his grin defiant despite the cold. Amos's throat tightened, his fingers tracing the edges of the photo. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, his voice rough. "County records," Carter said. "They've got boxes of stuff nobody's touched in years. I've been digging." Amos didn't say anything, just stared at the photo. He hadn't seen Tommy's face in decades, not like this. Frozen in time. Alive. The memory hit hard. Tommy's laugh, his bad jokes, the way he'd shared his last cigarette in the dark. The letter in Amos's wallet felt heavier, its words louder now. "You should show it," Carter said quietly. "At the center, when it's ready. People need to see." Amos shook his head, a reflex. "Not for show." "Not for show," Carter agreed. "For them." For Tommy, Amos looked up, meeting Carter's eyes. There was no pity there, no agenda, just understanding. He nodded just once and slipped the photo into his wallet, next to the letter and the note. The center opened on a cold Saturday in December, a modest affair in the library's back room. The radiator still hissed, but the walls were freshly painted, the tables covered with checkered cloths from Rosie's. A small crowd gathered, veterans, families, a few curious locals. The mayor gave a speech, shorter this time, and Sarah from the diner handed out coffee, her clipboard nowhere in sight. Amos stood at the back, his cap low, the photo and letter burning a hole in his pocket. Carter had asked him to say something, but Amos had refused. He wasn't a speaker, never had been. But as the event wound down, as people milled around with coffee and stories, Carter approached again, this time with a small wooden frame in his hands. Inside was the photograph, mounted neatly, with a brass plate beneath it. Chosin Reservoir, 1950. In memory of those who held the line. "I hope this is okay," Carter said, his voice low. "I thought it belonged here." Amos stared at the frame, at Tommy's grin, at his own young face. The room seemed to fade, the voices dimming. He saw the snow again, felt the cold, heard Tommy's voice. "Tell them we fought for each other." His hand went to his wallet, to the letter, and for the first time, he felt ready to let it go. Not to forget, but to share. He took the frame, his hands steady, and walked to the front of the room. The crowd quieted, sensing the shift. Amos didn't speak for a long moment, just held the frame up, letting them see. "This was us," he said finally, his voice rough but clear. "We were kids, scared out of our minds. But we held on, for each other. This," he tapped the frame. "This is what that meant." The room was silent, every eye on him. Sarah's hand stilled on the coffee pot. The mayor shifted, his face softer now. A kid in the back, the one with the toolbox, wiped his eyes. Amos set the frame on a table, next to a small flag, and stepped back. Carter saluted, slow and deliberate, and the other veterans followed, a ripple of respect that filled the room. Amos returned the salute, his hand steady, his heart full. For the first time in years, he felt like he'd kept his promise. The center became a quiet fixture in Millville, a place where veterans gathered not for fanfare, but for coffee, cards, and stories. Amos went every week, not to talk, but to listen, to watch the room fill with faces, old, young, broken, healing. The photograph hung on the wall, a silent testament, and sometimes, when no one was looking, Amos would touch the frame, his fingers lingering on Tommy's grin. Sarah started a tradition, a small one. Every Veterans Day, Rosie's would host a breakfast, no clipboard required. The note in Amos's wallet stayed there, joined by others. Scribbled thanks from kids, a card from Carter, a drawing from the girl with the flag. He carried them all, a new weight, lighter than the letter, but just as real. The town changed too, in small ways. The monument got a new plaque, listing campaigns like Chosen, a nod to the quiet ones. People greeted Amos on the street now, not with pity, but with nods, with "Morning, Mr. Reed." He didn't smile much, but his eyes were softer, his steps surer. And every morning, as he sat at Rosie's, the coffee hot and the window cold, Amos felt it. A quiet valor, not just his own, but shared, remembered, alive. The end inspired by the quiet heroism all around us. Stories like Amos's remind us to notice the unseen, to honor the unspoken. Subscribe to Hoffman's stories for more tales of compassion and connection, and share your own at hoffmansstories.com.